Senator Menendez of New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on the preemptive nature of this issue. I worry that AI has the power to compound the existing problem of fraud in the financial system. According to the FTC, consumers reported losing nearly $9 billion to fraud in 2022, with more than a quarter of those losses coming from imposter scams. So, Ms. Cody, do you agree that AI could contribute to a rise in this type of fraud?
So I'm very interested in the potential of data and more advanced analytics, including AI, to address fraud. This is not an area that FinReg Lab has studied deeply, but I do think there are ways that we could be potentially leveraging the more complex analytics with comprehensive data to do a better job of catching fraud actors of different types. So I would love to come back to you on the other side of potential research.
Well, consumers could see themselves becoming victims of increasingly sophisticated scams as a result of AI, both due to increasingly accurate deepfakes, more precisely targeted social engineering attacks, and it's not just the consumers that are being targeted. There have been reports of scammers using AI to imitate a consumer's voice in order to trick their bank or credit card servicer into transferring funds or giving away information. What can and should financial institutions be doing to minimize the risk of AI-powered scams targeting them and their customers? And I'd open that up to any member of the panel. Ms.
Now, I'm happy to jump into that, and I think that there's a few things that should happen. First, law enforcement agencies should be taking a lead in terms of understanding the broad nature of the scams that are taking place. Just this past week, NSA, FBI, and CISA put out a very good report on deepfakes and scams, and it's that type of information that can then be circulated amongst financial regulators and the private sector to look at the best ways to combat this. And just like any other technology that's developed, it can be used for fraud, crime, and other scams, but you can also leverage that technology for good. So I think it's critical that financial institutions invest in AI-related technologies to detect fraud and scams. It's also important for financial regulators to have the resources to be able to invest in that type of technology as well. From a surveillance perspective and transaction monitoring perspective, you can use tech to combat. I also think collaboration between public and private sector on this, sharing threats, is really important.
All right.
And
I like some of those. Yes.
yeah, if I might add. So I agree that AI is potentially very powerful fraud scamming technology. It's really on the dimension from misinformation to new kinds of fraud. I think that Senator Rounds made some really important, excellent points about we have existing fraud protection laws. We also have the ability to enlist AI in combating fraud, and I think that could be a really powerful tool. The things that I would suggest also focusing on, though, is that when you have the AI on the fraud side and on the regulation side, that is another example of one of these arms races, and where that leads to is somewhat indeterminate. And I think that needs a lot more study. The other is that there could be new kinds of fraud that are falling through the cracks of the existing legal or regulatory system, in part because of some of the AI loophole notion that I mentioned in my testimony, where laws that were developed not thinking of this kind of super impersonation or there are other new kinds of things, or things that were done by automation rather than by people, are not really covered.
Let me go to a different topic. Because of the way AI learns by studying large sets of data, if there is a bias in the underlying data, then it can become encoded in the AI decision-making process. In financial services, this can exacerbate existing disparities in areas such as mortgage lending, capital allocation, and credit availability, among others. Professor Wellman, how can we work to ensure that AI doesn't stratify or even expand existing disparities in access to financial services?
Yes, and I think as Ms. Cody in her testimony pointed out, it really can cut either way. And what we really need are better tools for interrogating our models to understand what is the basis that they are making decisions on. Are they using factors that we would rather they not use? Again, it's another area where the existing discrimination legal framework may or not be adequate in all senses to capture the kinds of discrimination that could come from AI models.
Yeah, my experience, unfortunately, is that when it can cut either way, it normally cuts against us as a minority community. So how should we think about issues of accountability and oversight when it comes to AI models? Anyone have any ideas on that? Yes.
I'd be happy to answer. Yeah, I mean, what's really important here is making sure to start that the data that you're using to build the models in the first place sufficiently represent full populations. And one of the challenges we've had in terms of access to wealth building opportunities like mortgages is we have 50 million US adults who cannot be credit risk assessed with traditional data and traditional methods. So we've studied cash flow data as a type of financial data from a bank account or a transaction account, and interrogated, is that data enabling lenders to actually credit risk assess populations who otherwise would be excluded? We looked at short-term revolving small dollar lines of credit, but we did find that cash flow data are predictive, and they are more representative of underserved populations and communities. So to start with, making sure that the data that these more complex models or even simple logistic models are using is fully representative is an important place to start. I do think the disparate impact requirement assessment, our fair lending laws, are putting obligations, legal obligations, on interrogating for disparities between different demographic populations. And we did interrogate the extent to which approaches for finding less discriminatory model alternatives using automated techniques and machine learning techniques work. And there we actually did find you can identify models that create less disparities using these more automated and machine learning approaches. And so we're quite encouraged by that. But let me be clear, we were looking at supervised machine learning algorithms, not the types of Gen AI large language models that I think are capturing a lot of our attention right now.
Senator Kennedy of Louisiana is recognized.